Well, hello, my fellow car modelers. How you doing today? Welcome to another episode of Model Car Hobby Headquarters, and we are going to be taking a look at another very old classic Scale Auto Enthusiast. We did one of these types of shows a few months back, and it just gives some of you newer comers to the hobby a chance to look at this great magazine from its glory days when it really was a game changer. Back in the 70s, it was a game changer for our hobby. It really was the magazine that created our hobby to go forward and keep continuing on and go through the renaissance of the 80s. This was from a period of time when I had just gotten really going in the hobby, discovered Scale Auto. This was probably like one of my first 2 or 3 issues I ever got it at the hobby shop, and this was another one that made me go wow. I remember carrying this issue around with me everywhere I went. I was getting so enthralled with the hobby and excited about the hobby, and I hadn't met anybody else yet that was into the hobby, and I carried this magazine around with me and reading it everywhere I went. And this thing had a lot of really cool articles that, I took to heart in my model building. And again, this is from the Gary Schmidt era. It was pre-Kalmback. It was still very, I don't want to say underground. Of course, it wasn't underground, but it was really in its height of this Gary Schmidt era. He was the creator of this magazine. So let's go ahead and just take a look at it, okay? And we'll just. I haven't looked at this issue in many years, so it's going to be a fun trip down memory lane for me. But big ads from Testers. Back when Testers was doing, I still have a bottle of that, as a matter of fact, just like that. Of course, not in reaching distance. And so here we go. There's all the features. And this was an interesting feature. We'll get to it. It was painting models with fingernail polish. And in the 80s, there was a lot of cheap model polish out there that was really these exciting colors. And you got to understand, back then, there just wasn't a big variety of colors for us to put onto our cars. And it was not so obtainable to get automotive paints back then. So this was a real killer eye-opener. And a cool little scratch build of this and a Caravan. But let's continue on. And whammo, you have the editor doing his little, this is what I think. We're going to go right over here to, again, MSC Model Car Products. They were the groundbreakers. I've covered this before, and there's Don Farney's model. Just cool. Could order right out from this. It was their catalog, and you can order it right from the magazine, send in a letter to them with a check, and they'd send you your product, and the product was just amazing, outstanding. And we are just going on, and look at that. There's an ad. That was the first magazine that we took a look at a couple months ago. And you could, again, send in your letter asking a question, and someone would respond to you. That's a Facebook group right there back in the days before computers. Well, not computers, I'm sorry. Before internet for our use. And you had a question, you'd send it in, hopefully they would answer you, and you'd see it in the next issue or 2 or 4 months later. Oh, I want to talk about this. There were some great shows in the 80s, and this was one of the big ones, the Southwest Challenge. And this was an influence in me. That little guy right there is the whole reason why Scully exists, my logo, which came from something original. We did a model show, Aaron and I. If you watched our little unpodcast, we did these shows, and there was a show we did here in town, and that was where that logo originated from. He kind of collabed with me. He kind of came up with the idea of it. I sketched it out, and my father drew that, and that's where Scully originally came from. And my thing was, I said to Aaron, remember the Southwest Challenge? They had this neat logo of this cartoon character, basically a tire that's a gunslinger. We need something that it will get to the point when the show gets big and known after many years of doing it, which we only did it 1 year. People would just see the logo and know what it is. In the long run, good thing the show didn't really work out, and we never did another one because then I got to keep that logo. And when I was trying to come up with a logo for this channel, my son-in-law said, well, right there it is. Let you know, that's how the coming of Scully came, and that was the influence of Scully. I never got to go to it, always wanted to, but it was a really, really giant show back in the 80s. And let's just continue on. Of course, they do their on the shelf with what kits came out and all these models that came out. I got that kit. I got that. I remember when all those were brand new kits. They covered the Fujimi kits and oh yeah, Blue Printer. They brought back the 64 Galaxy in the Blue Printer. And oh boy, the Ferrari Daytona, the 365 GTB. I want that kit. That's now pretty freaking desirable. Nice Fujimi ad. And then they did the enthusiast gallery. You could send in a black and white picture, and I've done this a few times and never got in the magazine. You send in a black and white picture, and they would feature your model. But this was something very cool that the old Scale Auto used to do. It was pretty neat. Collector showcase. It mostly featured small stuff. We've looked at those before. The NNL West, which I believe the same show is still going on, but here we go. Model contest coverage, and not in a nice, pretty studio type environment, individual cars. I always thought that was a bummer that they wouldn't do this when Kalmback took over the magazine. I always liked this coverage. First of all, being in the main magazine, but you get more bang for your buck. Look at that. You've got one picture that has 3 models in it. One picture that has 3 models in it. You get the feel of the show. This was model car show coverage. At its best, my opinion, but that's what I say. And boy, was this inspirational. Mike Carroll, he was a big name in the hobby back in the 80s, and he did these series of cars called Nuclear Waste, just a really cool customs. And they continue on. Here's more coverage. There's 4 pages. Even though it went black and white, we got 4 pages. Look at that. Talk about bang for the buck. That is a ton of models on one picture. That's the way to do a model car show. Coverage, that is. All right. Made to order. This is the complete guide to the aftermarket back in those days. And this is really cool. We had a pretty strong aftermarket, not like we do today, but it was a little harder to do back then. These guys were ingenious, and they did with technology that we have today that they didn't have. So much was hand done, and these guys would produce this stuff and get it out to us, and it was called cottage industry back those days. That was a real common term. And this is a guide to some of the best ones of the day. And we have, let's take a look, J&J Hobbies, a stock car, model car builders. Remember J&J? J&J were the first to give us alternative decals for building other stock cars besides what the kit manufacturers put out. And they were before Slicks, they were before Ace decals, and quite honestly, they were the ones that influenced those companies to, do yesterday's decals, Mike in general, Mike's decals, outstanding place to shop for decals, and especially stock car stuff. He carries everything, and he even still has some old J&J. They're starting to run out. They're really old. Excellent quality decals. You also had Fred Katie, but these decals were outstanding. And then they got into resin conversions. This was a Buick conversion to put onto the Oldsmobile that Monogram put out, the 86 Oldsmobile, when it was the first front-wheel drive car converted for NASCAR. This gave you the opportunity to turn that into a Buick. More choices. So much. Look at all these. Shabu. They were a cool company. They started out with just doing tire lettering, and they ended up starting to do really, really cool. Matter of fact, I think I got one right here. This is one of their. I messed up the lettering on it. You can see it had lettering. This is one of their drag tires. Later on, they did really, really out. Look at that, they're squishy. See, is there another one in here? They were squishy. These tires were just really, really. These are just really killer. Even now, they really took off, and then they, went resin casters, and this was actually vacuum form and resin conversion kits. MSC Model Products, Parts by Parks. They were one of the first turned aluminum companies. Look at this. It's just, there was a lot of companies back then. They did a lot of neat stuff. LMG Industries. I used to buy from them. They were a really cool company. Here's something that I bought from L&M Industries. Or what is it? LMG Industries. Is right there. They were the first time I ever saw like little hex bolts to do your detailing. And this is what I got from them. And the Model Doctor. LMG Enterprises. I bought a bunch of stuff that I still have. I never even got to open those up. I had used a whole bunch of these. I had tons of them. But that is something that I probably purchased that in like 1988. Rees Precision Miniatures. An old resin caster. That was a nice Oldsmobile 442 conversion kit. Early resin casting. I don't even remember them. Some of these guys I just forgot. Mini Exotics. Just tons of stuff back then. How cool is all that? So, and there's old Fred Cady right there. Flex File. Still around. Curbside Dioramas. That was R&D Unique. Is R&D Unique still around? I know I got tons of their stuff. I believe they are. Detail Masters. Still around. So some of them made it. Some not so much. So let's move along. Mark Gustafson. Those of you who don't know that name, Mark Gustafson was a giant in the hobby back then and still remembered today. He was the guy who started the Salt Lake Show. He was a huge contributor to this magazine in the early days and just did outstanding models and always shared what he did and tips and everything on how to do things. But to me, the biggest thing Mark ever did that I think is something that still needs to continue on in this hobby is up in Salt Lake. He is the curator of a model car museum that I never ever have gotten to go there. I've donated stuff to him. I highly, highly support that. I think it's very limited now. Whenever they do a Salt Lake show, that's the only time the museum opens. But this guy, with his own money, would rent a place, keep all such famous and well-known things for our hobby to preserve the history of the hobby. Everything that's happened in our hobby is in that museum. And if there's a way that we can get that out to all of you model guys who weren't around back in the early days to see where we all came from and how much progression has happened in the hobby, it's because of guys like Mark and those aftermarket companies why we have what we have today in this great hobby that is very much alive. And now, painting your models with nail polish. This was so cool, and I remember that nail polish right there I went and snagged, and I like the blue. I found in a dollar store, bought up a whole bunch of different colors, and I shot some models with that color right there and a few others. There was all these great colors in the 80s because the girls were just going nuts. It was a flashy time period if you were there. And it also goes over all the stuff you can use with that product, which you could thin this with lacquer thinner, with just household cleaning, the Home Depot lacquer thinner, hardware store lacquer thinner. That's always what I did. I painted this model right here with that technique, and it still looks great today. And I ended up clearing it with just like an automotive clear. This stuff just could handle anything. It was really easy to use, really simple to paint with the airbrush. And it was a great idea. It gave us options for a lot of neat colors that we didn't have. Then all of a sudden the 90s came and the colors went away. I remember in the 90s, if you were into doing this, all of a sudden there were just no more options of trick colors. Wet and Wild that was one of the best ones. Wet and Wild had the greatest palette, and then all of a sudden the 90s hit and the girls weren't into flashy anymore and grunge music came and everybody got sad. All the colors were very blah and dark and eh. And here we are going to take a look at Rocco Richardson's. He was another model builder that was kind of ahead of his time back then and just did some great work, lots of customizing. But I remember looking at this, and these were models that just made me inspired. And of course this, I go, wow, a Nova. Man, you could not find a Nova. And that was cool. This was an old kit. But I remember looking at this picture right here and looking at its wiring. And I started doing this twisty here. I started doing that a lot on my models. I still every once in a while do that, but that was where I saw the twisty effect, and I just thought it looked really cool on this Pro Street. But this was actually a car that was in Hot Rod Magazine, a car very similar to this. And it was fairly recently put out, and then he did this. This guy was one of those inspirational trendsetters of the hobby, really showing how much farther you could go, with model cars in an art form. This is total art. These things are still impressive today, and this was, 1988. This issue came out. Oh yeah, the old Pit Pass. This was cool. This was the first Pit Pass I ever saw of I think they had done one or two before that, but this was the first time I saw a Pit Pass in Scale Auto, and what a great idea to show real car, because this was a current kit that came out. Monogram had just come out with the Tide Monte Carlo. Great article. Bob Wagner was the writer and I believe photographer, and this was just an eye-opener. It was really cool to see something like this, because you just didn't get to see a Winston Cup car that kind of detail if you didn't get your opportunity to get down in the pits yourself and take pictures. That just wasn't available back in those days like it is today. And let's not forget our truck guys. Amazing detail. Look at the weathering. Look at the chipping and the dirt. Yeah, you had to do it on a truck because, it's a work vehicle. And here we go. More show coverage. How cool is that? Here's another one of the big ones. One of the big granddaddy shows that really was one that everybody from all over the country would try to get to. The Milwaukee Classic. This was the 6th one, I believe they did. And this was one of the big ones that pulled the big dogs in for heavy competition. And the Milwaukee show was another one of those big ones to go to. And I think I've talked about, and I even talked about this model. I saw this model a ton. It blew my mind with all the roll cage and everything. But this was a really nice shot of Chuck Larson. He was a guy, and he popped up, and then he was gone. Didn't hear anything out. Pretty much after this truck did its rounds, I don't think you ever really heard of him. Chuck, are you still out there? Does anybody know Chuck? Anything about him? He was from Waukesha, Wisconsin. He was just an innovator in our hobby and just did amazing stuff. Look at that. That thing would blow your mind today. Look at the amount of scratch building and engineering involved in that. Just a fantastic modeler and a slick paint. I'd like to know what happened with Chuck and what went on. If he's still around, if he's still with us today. When did he stop model building? Does he still model build? It's always neat to find these guys. But look at all these beautiful models. There's some really neat inspirational stuff. And I remember this. Steve Haywood did this whole race team, Bobby Allison's race team. This blew my mind, and to this day I still haven't done a race team and have wanted to. I got the truck and the trailer and everything. I want to do something like this ever since I saw this picture, and now that just ignited me again. And look at this. We talked about J&J Hobbies, J&J decals. There it is. They're the guys. Us stock car model car builders just lost our minds with this company. It's all we had. We could do J.D. McDuffie's car. I did get these Lifebuoy decals because I wanted to do Dave Marcus's car. But, you could do what you could do back in those days. Technology wasn't as today. You can't get those good pictures. But we got an idea. We knew what these were. We followed NASCAR. We ordered the heck out of decals and resin kits from these guys. There's that little trailer, how to make that neat little thing. Gives you all the templates right there. And we could just go on. And we're halfway through. We're a little more than halfway through the book. But look at how this book was just filled with all this modeling tips, different subjects. Advertisers index right there. So if you're looking for a certain advertiser, you'll want to order from them. There you go. Look at this. It's old Indy cars and Formula One cars. They just covered everything. You have every interest you had was in one issue. And there's Detail Masters ads, and they're still around today. Model Firehouse. They always had this regular, it was in every issue back in the day for people who built fire trucks. Wow, you wouldn't think that they were a big enough subject in our hobby to cover every month about model model car fire trucks. Even, uh-oh. Oh no. Is that a military vehicle? Actually, it's a police vehicle. This is Scale Auto Enthusiast. What the heck? Pretty cool. Even the small truck collectible things. Look at that. And we're getting to the back of it where there's most of the ads are. S&S Specialty. Fred Katie decals. He did stock car decals. And then we get into like the want ads. There's Craigslist right there. and Facebook Marketplace right there. And you just hoped that it worked out. All through the snail mail. Plastics wanted, pro stocks, funny cars, 24 scale pro stock tires and wheels, and anything in drag racing. This guy was trying to build up an inventory of parts and pieces and hoping that someone wouldn't say, yeah, I got it, send me a check, and you'd never see it. Which that happens today, but you have a little more recourse today with the technology. But then you were just stuck. And it just goes on, all different subjects. And we're at the back. Oh, speaking of the back issues. Look at that. There was all these. They went all the way back to 83. 5 years back. You could get all your... Which I did. I ordered a few from this because I started in late and I wanted some older issues that I have now. And cool. Look at that. I have this kit. I have this kit. It's a Tide Monte Carlo from Starter, the little 43rd scale resin. That's interesting. That's how old that is. And that's the end. Big Tamiya MRC ad on the back. That is our Scale Auto from the day. This is a really, really cool issue. I told you, you can see how war it is. I took this thing everywhere with me and was reading the heck out of it. Thought I'd share it with you guys. We covered all this stuff. Look at that. All the different subjects. It piqued your interest, everybody's interest. The aftermarket industry, Rocco's models, the Graham Hill Indy Lola that we saw, that whole article on it. Yeah, how cool is that? Even says Pit Pass, Darrell Waltrip's NASCAR Monte Carlo. Contest, Milwaukee, NNL West. This magazine had it all. You just needed one issue every other month, and you got your fill. So I want to thank you guys for going down this trip down memory lane with me. I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this, please put down in the comments below anything. If you want me to keep on doing more of these, if you like looking at these old Scale Autos, go ahead. If you've been thinking about, I want to try to hunt some of these down and buy them up, you still see them on eBay and other areas. You know, guys are selling collections. And you think, wow, do I want that? You know what? Yeah. For the history of the hobby, and there's still great stuff in these that you can pick up, even though we have every tip we need on the internet and on Facebook, especially Lucas C's Model Car Hobby Headquarters Facebook group. If you can get a hold of these, they're just neat to sit down and read through and just enjoy and see what it was like back in those days. So thanks a bunch for watching. Like, subscribe, keep on making all your comments down below. Let's keep this community going. And let's say thanks to my producers. And if you want to be a producer, check on the link below in the Patreon. Get to our Patreon. We're starting to do a lot more things for just the Patreon producers. So remember what we say. Keep gluing those fingers together and keep cutting that styrene. And we will see you in the next video. Bye. Lucas C. Model Car Hobby Headquarters Facebook group. You know, when you're looking for stuff, you find the damnedest things. Ooh. And, Reese Precision Unique. What format are we talking about? Oh, whoops, geez, let's wreck the whole show. Thanks, that's just awesome. Kill my shot. Nice. Big enough uh-oh. Oh no.